happy birthday chorus. Begin.
I'm not leading.
What do you have to say?
I can't lead.
Samantha. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Samantha. Happy birthday to you. Remember, Samantha, this tie is 17 years old.
Hey, I still need some.
Everything I own is 17 years old. Okay, so on the test you take on Friday, there will be something similar to what you see here. Now this is the village of Secota, right? And this is a John White watercolor. John White was the governor of Roanoke. He drew and painted scenes that he saw in what is nowadays North Carolina that were part of the Roanoke colony. This is one of his paintings. It was engraved later by DeBry, who was an engraver who engraved it in 1590, based on a white painting. Right? This is pretty famous. You see this often. You see this in a lot of things. I think it's in your textbook. You'll see it prominently when they talk about how the British viewed the Native Americans in North America in their early period of settlement. Right? So it would not be unusual to see something like this on the AP test, and either to be asked multiple choice questions about it, or to be asked the kind of questions that you see on the next page. And this is what you're going to see on Friday. You're going to see some kind of either primary or secondary source, and then based on that primary, secondary source, 3 questions. Right? And here you see them are divided. You use the image of the village of Secota to answer parts A, B, and C. What is the main idea the work is trying to convey? So put down below on this paper, down here, put A, right? Put a little A. What is the main idea this work is trying to convey? What in the work supports your contentions? Then leave a space and put below that B. How might the idea expressed in this work have encouraged or discouraged, and it says of the settlement, it should say discourage the settlement of North America. Scratch that of out and put the settlement of North America by the British. Then leave space and put C. Identify one way the early history of Jamestown settlement supports or dispels the main message of the work. Now, in any kind of prompt like this, the most important thing is responding to all of the questions. So when you get the question on Friday, what you want to do is break down every element of what's being asked. Now they do it a little bit here, but I think that consciously saying, okay, what are the things that I'm going to be at? What are the things I'm asked, and what do I know about it? Right? So what do I know about the first question based on this source? So under A, it says, what is the main idea this work is trying to convey? So let's take a look at it. And what do we see here? So we're looking at it, and clearly we know that it's an Indian village, right? So what is he trying to convey in what he depicted here? What would you write under A? So if you were going to respond to this, based on what you see there, what idea do you have about what you might note for yourself under category A? What do you think the main idea of the work is? Go ahead. Anisha, right? Ashwarya, go ahead.
The image conveys the daily lifestyle of Native Americans.
So it shows natives in their usual business. So write that down. Natives in their, I agree with that. It shows natives in their usual business. What else? What else? Yes, go ahead. So one thing that you see, in lots of this work, you see agriculture. what two crops do you see? Well, you see one crop that I think is easily identifiable. Yes? Corn. Right? I think that's easily identifiable by those high stalks. But look at the area that is H. What is that? We don't know, but I can give you a tip. It's tobacco. Right? It's tobacco. I mean, why would that make sense? Why would it make sense that it's tobacco? Yes? Well, Rolf eventually is, but tobacco is going to be, something that, they might look to commercially cultivate there, right? So what else? What, besides agriculture, yes, what else is a main? I mean, I don't know. How so?
Well, the agriculture part, the houses.
Yes, let's just stop there. They have what seem to be secure dwellings, right? That are in an organized manner. They are going about their business, are they not? Some Native Americans, if you look at the top of the page, have arrows, and they're shooting animals. Others are dancing, walking through the streets. They have a fire there. So what do you think the main point is, based on what you see? Yes? Well, yeah. I mean, that they're civilized. Yeah, okay, yes.
It's possible to live.
Maybe the main point is that it's possible for people to exist here. They are self-sustaining, right? They are growing their food. They have their dwellings, right? That they're living in. So it's possible for even savages like them to sustain themselves in this world. Now let's look at B. How might the main, let's assume that is the main point. Let's assume the main point of this work is that these people are able to live lives, sustain themselves, grow crops, even as savages, have dwellings in this land. So the environment there is not so hostile that other people can't live there. Now, the second question under B, how might the main idea expressed in this work have encouraged or discouraged the settlement of North America? Do you think that message would encourage or discourage settlement, and why? Do you think it would? Go ahead, Colton.
Encourage.
So you're going to say encourage, right? So why?
Because they can show that if the savages do it, then they're civilized.
Yes, if they can do it, we can do it. So, particularly the corn, right? The corn is going to say, look, you can feed yourself. The tobacco suggests that you can make money. You can build dwelling places. And what also are the natives doing? They're living their lives, right? They're conducting their rituals. They're living their lives. They're defending themselves from animals that are trying to attack their crops. But they're able to do this. So certainly we would be able to do this. Under C, identify one way the early history of Jamestown supports or dispels the main message of the work. So if the main message is that the land there is sustainable, what in the history of Jamestown would support or dispel that? Go ahead, Alice.
I'd say dispel because, considering the early history of Jamestown was that they couldn't really plant anything because it was so marshy, and a lot of people died in the early years.
Okay, so we know this. We know that it was a very disease-ridden place. They had a very difficult time, actually sustaining themselves. But go ahead. I'm sorry, what was your first name?
Anika.
Anika.
It could be that they suffered through the winter, so obviously we can't live there.
Okay, so we know this. We know that there was death and suffering, famine in Jamestown. We know that. Let's just write that down. Okay, write that down under C. What else do we know about Jamestown? What else do we know about Jamestown? Yes?
Wait, something else you mentioned that.
We know that they grew tobacco in Jamestown, so let's just write that down. We grew tobacco. Right? Okay, what else? What else might relate to this that we know about Jamestown? Go ahead, Antonio, right? What was your first name? Antonio. Oh, I'm sorry, you never hear that? Go ahead. What else do we know about Jamestown? What other things do we know about Jamestown that might be in any way relevant? Let's go, Jason. Go ahead, Samantha, in honor of your 17th birthday. Did you make a wish as we were singing? I don't know. That's only if there's a cake, right? You make a wish. Yeah, you did not make a wish. Yes. So what else? Anybody? Yes, go, Jason.
Well, I'd say this spells the main message because the people in Jamestown did not initially thrive, and even when they were they still didn't thrive as much.
Yeah, so you say that the people in Jamestown did not thrive, they did not sustain themselves? Okay, all right. What else do we know about Jamestown that might be relevant to this? Anything else? How about the relationship between Native Americans and the, yes, go ahead.
Well, they planned on depending on the Indians, right?
Yes.
So they probably had an idea that they were already trying stuff there before they came.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. What Haverly said is they planned on depending on the Indians, and that may be a message there. Look, there are people already there growing food. You don't have to worry about it. You know, I mean, so they can do it, we can do it. They're already growing it. We can take it from them if we want to. Notice there aren't any defenses in this city, right, that he depicts. There's no walls there. The Indians don't seem hostile, you know, the way they are depicted. All right, let's take a look at this. Okay, now take a look at my response. I don't think it's a great response, but I think it's an adequate response. Now remember, and this is what you want to model your response. I'll pass those over to Jason. And then pass this up to the next row behind you, and pass these up to the rows behind that. And then here you go, 1, 2, 3, 4, pass that along. Okay, so what are you going to be expected to do? When you get that question on Friday, what you are going to be expected to do is kind of what we did here. And that is break down the elements of the question, consider what you know about those elements of the question, and attempt to formulate, everybody look at me, and attempt to formulate a response, right? So based on what you wrote on your other paper, this is what I consider to be an adequate response. John White's depiction of the village of Sakota shows a bustling, productive, seemingly friendly Indian village. Would you agree with that? It suggests the land is productive and food can be easily grown, even by potentially helpful savages. So if we look at the first question, it says, what's the main idea the work is trying to convey? What in the work supports those contentions, right? So at least the first part of that I've addressed in the first two sentences. What's the main idea of this work? A potentially productive, seemingly friendly Indian village with land is productive and food can be easily grown, even by Indians that are considered to be savages. Now, second part of that is, what in the work supports your contentions? The native pictures appear to be engaged in various aspects of their lives, while a great amount of corn grows around the village, right? So, okay, what in there supports that? That the natives are conducting their normal lives, and in doing so, they are growing a lot of corn. So that's what's in the picture that supports the first idea. Now, does the work too, how might the main idea expressed in the work have encouraged or discouraged settlement of North America? White's work seems to encourage settlement, a direct response to it, right? Seems to encourage settlement. If the natives are helpful and can so easily cultivate the land, then the food will be abundant. Prospective settlers will not need worry about conflict or survival. Now, third question. Identify one way the early history of Jamestown settlement supports or dispels the message of the work. Look what it says. The history of Jamestown. Again, note how I kind of directly use the words in the question itself in the sentences for my response. And that's okay. I mean, it's okay to use those same words because you want to be direct. You want to directly respond to the question. Now, the most common mistake kids in history make when they respond to a history prompt of any kind, whether it's a limited prompt like this, a more expansive prompt like the one we'll do later in the month, is they basically want to say everything they know about the topic. Right? So you might know a lot about whatever the topic of the piece is, but the key is always to respond directly to the question. And the easiest way to respond directly to the question is to, in some ways, use some of the words in the prompt itself to directly do it. And I do that here. The history of Jamestown settlement, which is basically kind of words from the prompt, supports the idea of the natives being productive. Right? Now, I mean, you guys brought up the fact that the settlers weren't productive. Right? In my opinion, the main point of this work was that the natives were productive. Does the history of Jamestown support that? Yes. Now, how does the history of Jamestown support that? The Puritans provided corn for the Europeans. We know that's true. We know that's what got them through the first winter. It was the corn from the Puritans that got them through the first winter, right? And to the Europeans as gifts the first winter, and for trade. We remember that document that we read about John Smith and a Powhatan. However, they were not always friendly. That's true, particularly when the settlers tried to raid their villages for food. Now, I would consider this an adequate response to that question. Note its brevity. These short response questions are intended to be one paragraph. And you can see that the elements of the question usually are limited to a sentence or two. So if you have 3 points like that, and sometimes there are multiple aspects to the point, you're looking at a sentence that very specifically responds to the question, and then wrapping that up in a paragraph. So, again, when you get that test on Friday, there'll be one thing like this. So that will be part of the test. In addition to that, there'll be 43 multiple choice questions, and let's go over some of those. And they will start in chapter 1 in your textbook, and they will start with a discussion of pre-Columbian America, right? So there isn't going to be a lot of questions about pre-Columbian America, but one of the things that we might ask about is how the first humans, how it was suspected that the first humans actually got to the Western Hemisphere. How was that? Who did they suspect? Go ahead, what is it? Anisha, what is it? Aparna. What is it? Aparna. Go ahead, Aparna. First humans into the Western Hemisphere, it is suspected came from where? Yes, the land bridge across the Bering Strait. Maybe they were Asiatic in nature. They crossed the land bridge in the Bering Strait and descended south through what is now Alaska, into Canada, down into North America, and as far as the southernmost tip of South America. So now we know from those alleged original settlers that came, not settlers, but migrants that came there, that there were multiple Native American tribes that existed in North America before Europeans discovered North America, South America, the Western Hemisphere, before Europeans discovered that hemisphere. Now, we talked a little bit about those tribes. One of the things that we mentioned is that there were so many of them that it was kind of difficult to talk about, right? And that they were widely diverse. Some of them, some of the tribes, some of the civilizations that were in the Western Hemisphere had vast, powerful, influential, what we would consider to be wealthy empires. The Aztecs and the Incas would be examples of that. There won't be any questions on the test about the Aztecs and the Incas. right? There will be questions on the test about why there was diversity amongst the Native American tribes. And the diversity usually is attributed to a response by individual people to the environment that they find themselves in. Right? So what causes this diversity? Why are these people different? Why do they have differing political organizations, social structures, means of addressing the environment that they live in? Is because of the environment that they live in. Now, we did choose one tribe to focus on, two really. I mean, we spoke a lot about the Powhatans, right? And, you know, Powhatan the chief, and we talked a lot about that in Jamestown. But prior to that, we spoke of the Iroquois. And the thing to remember of the Iroquois is that they were a confederation of multiple tribes that were located in what is now western and northern New York. They were powerful because of their unity of purpose. And really, we talked about, you know, their matriarchal, you know, line, and, you know, there may be questions. There's a box in your book about the Iroquois, and there may be questions on the test that ask more specific detail about that particular Indian, or that particular Native American tribe. So the Iroquois, we did in fact focus on. It was the Iroquois that are going to trade with the Dutch. We talked about New York, you know, today, and Fort Orange. It's going to be the Iroquois that have trade networks that connect with the Netherlands and eventually the British in Fort Orange and what will be Albany. We're also going to, after, I mean, there's not going to be a lot of questions about that on the test. We're going to quickly go to kind of European discovery of North America, and certainly there will be questions as to why Spain was in the lead. We spoke of that extensively in class, and we said that, look, Columbus sailed for Spain, right? And Spain, you know, kind of led in exploration of the Western Hemisphere in the aftermath of Columbus. And in the 100 years that followed Columbus's discovery of America, Spain was able to establish a vast empire. Why was it? We gave a lot of reasons, but why was it? What is anything you can recall as to what put Spain in a position to be out front in colonization? Go ahead, Jason. Yes, we talked about that kind of unity as a nation state. What else? Anything else? Yes.
Popular monarchs.
They had these popular monarchs. We mentioned that they, yes, go ahead. Religious unity. They had expelled the Moors from Spain. They were united behind Catholicism. Go ahead, Shannon. Yeah, they had this national pride, a sense of destiny, right? And, you know, this is the context for Columbus, who is an Italian. And, you know, we know that when Columbus sails, his aspiration is to discover an all-water route sailing west to the Orient, which most people believed was possible. I mean, sure, there were superstitious people that thought that they would fall off of the earth, but most educated people in Europe understood that the earth was round and it was possible. Columbus's big kind of understanding was how long it would take, how far it actually was between the western part of Europe and Asia. And he actually believed that he had discovered, you know, the Orient. That's why he called the natives that he ran into Indians, right? Because he thought he had reached India. One of the things that we didn't talk a lot about in class, in the aftermath of Columbus, but there will be a few questions on the test, and there's a pretty significant box in your book on this as well, is the result of the European contact with the Western Hemisphere. And a part of that is an exchange that we call the Columbian Exchange. You know, plants, people, animals, maybe most significantly microbes. Probably the most significant result of European contact with the Western Hemisphere is the spread of European diseases amongst the Native Americans. I mean, remember, and I think there is a question or so on the test about this, it is estimated that there were probably 4 million Native Americans living in North America when Columbus landed, as many as 20 million Native Americans in all of the Western Hemisphere. Other estimates suggest that 90% of those people died eventually by contact with the Europeans and European diseases. So smallpox and measles and other European diseases are devastating to the Native American population. And we made that point today. You know, we made that point. We said, look, Pennsylvania's ease and prosperity and Penn's ability to deal with the Native Americans so amicably had a little bit to do with the fact that there weren't that many Native Americans there, because so many have been devastated by diseases. Now, in talking about Spain, we said that the Spanish, you know, prospered greatly from exploration and settlement of the Western Hemisphere, but sort of the symbolic decline of Spain occurs in 1588. And what did we identify? I mean, Spain, you can't really tie it to one single event, but we did. We kind of divided to one single event. What was it then? Yes, the defeat of the Spanish Armada, 1588. And what we said that represented was the beginning of the decline of Spain as the dominant colonial power in the Western Hemisphere, and the beginning of the ascension of England. And we made this point in class, that by 1604, England was taking on the same characteristics that Spain had in 1492. That England now had a popular monarch in Elizabeth I. They had some level of religious unity. They had a sense of pride and a sense of destiny. Those characteristics that defined Spain in 1492 now had evolved in England, and they were set now for exploration. I don't think I might have asked a question about Roanoke, right, the failed attempt at Roanoke, but certainly there will be questions on the test about their attempts to colonize at Jamestown. And one of them will involve the fact that Jamestown was settled by a private joint stock company called the Virginia Company. What was the significance of that? We kept making a big deal that Jamestown, that the settlement of Jamestown was a result of a business endeavor, right? I mean, what was the big deal about that? Yes. Pardon me? Yes, the big deal, what Haverly said, if you didn't hear, the big deal about that was the goal of this endeavor was to profit. And the reason that's a big deal is because it explains a lot. I mean, if you look at the white, you know, watercolor that I showed you, and this kind of bustling Indian village where the people are sustaining themselves, and they're even shown growing a cash crop, tobacco. Yet, when the settlers come there, the British settlers come there, they can't replicate the success that the Indians had. You know, so why is that? These Indians are savages, you know, and they can do it. And that was White's point to some extent. If the Native Americans can sustain themselves in this land, then why can't Europeans sustain themselves? Right? So what is the explanation as to why Jamestown had such difficulty? We gave multiple reasons. Go ahead, dear Shannon.
The people were dedicated and so they didn't have the work ethic unless they had work ethic.
Yeah, so one of the reasons that Jamestown did so poorly is because of the nature of the people that went there and their aspirations. As gentlemen, they wanted to just, you know, prosper. They thought that agricultural work was beneath them, so they were unwilling to kind of work it. And remember also, they had assumptions. And the assumptions were that they could exploit the Native Americans and take what they needed or trade for what they needed, the food that they needed, from the Native Americans, and that doesn't end up being the case, right? So, yes, we said that these are a number of things that results in that. What was John Smith's role in the early settlement? Yes, go ahead, Darius.
They were probably going to fail to unify the
Yeah, Smith is going to unify the colonies, get it under control, deal with the Native Americans, and get them through their most difficult winter, that first winter. So he is usually credited with sustaining the colonies. There is a little bit of discussion on the test about Smith and the Native Americans, Powhatan, and his daughter Pocahontas, and the kind of alleged saving that Pocahontas did of John Smith, and what might have been the real motivation for that is to show, for Powhatan to show Smith his power. Now, in the textbook, they talk about all of the southern colonies in one chapter. And the test that you take will always follow the text in the order that things are read in the text. So in the text, chapter 1, just a few questions about pre-Columbian Native Americans, the Iroquois, etc. Some questions about Spanish settlement. Chapter 2 is when you start to get into the British settlement of the southern colonies, Virginia first. We went up to New England. Your text then goes to Maryland. And like we said today, the significant story of Maryland is that there is a religious element to its settlement. What is that? We talked about it today, but let's just mention it again. Go ahead, Joe.
The founder was Catholic and he wanted it to be a safe place for Catholics to.
Yes, so Maryland would be a haven for persecuted British Catholics. It was a proprietary colony. What did that mean, Joel?
That means that one person was granted the land for it, so they chose the governors.
Yes, and they basically controlled and could dispose of that land in whatever manner they thought they could profit by. What was the Toleration Act? What did the Toleration Act of 49 ensure, Darius? Yes, it granted freedom of worship in all Christians. And remember, that Toleration Act was a response to more Protestants going to Maryland than Catholics. Now, in Maryland and in Virginia, they grew tobacco, which was considered a poor man's crop. Why was tobacco considered to be, Samantha, you are a student of tobacco cultivation, are you not? Why was tobacco considered to be a poor man's crop, dear Samantha? That's an excellent answer. It's a happy birthday answer from you. It is true. Samantha said that anyone could easily grow it. And I think the key word there is easily grow it. Sugar was considered a rich man's crop because it was not easy to grow. It required lots of land, lots of labor, lots of equipment in order to effectively and lucratively grow sugar. Now, sugar was something that you could make a lot of money on, but in order to grow it, you had to have lots and lots of land and labor. Tobacco, one person could cultivate. Not necessarily prosper, but one person could cultivate and sustain themselves, right? Now, the more people you had, the more you could make. And there was an incentive to have more land and more labor, but one person could cultivate tobacco effectively, hence we called it a poor man's crop. Now, in terms of slavery, and we said there are labor needs in the plantations of Maryland, and there are labor needs in the plantations of Virginia. And Maryland and Virginia, beyond the Catholic element of Maryland, are very much similar. I mean, they are plantation-based. Tobacco is important. You know, the indentured servants that we'll talk about tomorrow, eventually slaves. But we say eventually slaves in those colonies because essentially what colony leads the way in sort of establishing slavery? Anisha, Ano, Ashwarmi, right? Yeah, say it again. Ashwarya, go ahead, Ashwarya. The Carolina, Southern Carolina. And Ashwarya, in Southern Carolina, what's the crop that kind of has the labor demand that leads to slavery? Rice. Rice plantations are necessarily large. They need a skilled labor force. Slaves from Africa had those skills, and so they were brought to the rice plantations of Southern Carolina. And when those slaves went there, that's where slavery really is going to first take hold. They lead the way. Maryland and Virginia are going to take their kind of instruction in how to deal with slavery, how to establish slave codes from southern part of Carolina. North Carolina is different, and we talked about this today. How so, dear Farron, is North Carolina different than South Carolina?
Go ahead, you can.
Your name is Samantha too, isn't it?
No.
What is it?
Marissa.
Marissa. Go ahead, Marissa. How is North and South Carolina different? Farron threw it back to me, even though I asked him first. Oh, that's a good reason. Will you defer to your colleague two down from, what is your name? Valerie, your friend Valerie. Well, the North, I don't think anybody had industry. Go ahead, Celeste. Yeah, somebody said that. I mean, you have the advantage of somebody said that in one of our peers, which is a good response. You know, that you heard that was terrain. The terrain was different if you didn't hear Celeste. You know, the southern part of Carolina had a different terrain, different climate. They could grow rice. The northern part of Carolina was, more rugged, more rocky. Yes. Yeah, and you had different people that were going there. The social outcasts that left Virginia went to the northern part of Carolina, and they take on a separate identity, and they are recognized as a separate colony. Okay, if we go up to New England, now we have to start to talk about the Protestant Reformation. What's at the core? What does, I mean, I don't know, not specifically, but generally what does Luther challenge? Right? Not specifically, because I don't want you to say indulgences for sinners. Right? I mean, I know I told you that story, and I know you were fascinated by that religious discourse. I want you to say generally what Luther was challenging. Go ahead, Darius.
One, the existence of the church, and the authority of
Okay, I would say this. Darius, he said the authority of the church. I think that's a good thing. I mean, I don't think the authority of the church is good or bad, but I think that's an accurate thing to say. That Luther was challenging the authority. He said existence. I prefer a role of the church. Go ahead, Dan.
That people got into heaven by doing good deeds.
Yes. I mean, Antonio, that really is the center of it. How you got to heaven? How were you saved? Was it by works or by faith? Remember, and it was Luther that said it was by faith alone, by grace. Yes.
I was going to ask, so what do we call the opposite of predestination?
Well, it's called a covenant of works. The opposite of predestination is that you work your way into heaven. It's what you do. And remember, this becomes the discussion, and everything else goes from there. And, from that challenge, there is division. And that division is what prevented England from really embracing colonization while Spain was expanding. Remember, we had talked about this. Why was England so far behind? One of it is they didn't have religious unity. I mean, Henry VIII is going to pull England out of the Church of England. What does that mean? When I say Henry VIII pulls them out of the church, pulls England out of the Church of Rome, what does that mean? Ashwarya. That's right, isn't it? That's how you say it. Go ahead.
He just took it out from under the leadership of the church and made himself leader.
Yes, he made himself the head of the church. There's a question on the test about that, right? So he made himself the head of the church. In terms of leadership, the Church of England was no longer part of the Church of Rome. This had important implications because now they became Protestant. When Henry pulled them out and they became Protestant, what did the Puritans want? What did the Puritans, want now that they were Protestant in the first place? Go ahead, Joel.
Well, he didn't really change anything else except for the leadership of it.
Right.
He wanted to change all the aspects of the Protestant.
Yeah, so the Puritans wanted to go all the way to rid the Church of England Samantha, of all the vestige of Catholicism, and whose teachings did the Puritans base their ideology on? Go ahead, dear Capel. Calvin, yes, John Calvin, right? On John Calvin's, right? What was the difference between the Separatists? Stay with me just for another moment. What's the difference between the Separatists and the Puritans? The Separatists and the Puritans. Go ahead, Darius.
The Puritans believed that they purified the church within England. The Separatists believed that there was no hope for it.
Yes, the Separatists were going to break entirely. The Puritans remained part of the Church of England and hoped to reform it. Why did the kings persecute Puritans or Separatists or anybody? Why was it a problem to be at odds with the Church of England on any level? Why was this a problem? Go ahead. Aparna. There are a lot of A's amongst my Indian friends. Yeah. So yeah, Aparna. It is just going to take me at my age an awful long time to get this. Just an awful long time. Go ahead, Aparna.
Then the king wouldn't have power over him or her.
Yes. To question the Church of England is to question the power of the king. Right? In the simplest sense. Now remember, we talked about it in a more complicated way. But in a simplest sense, to challenge the authority of the Church of England is to challenge the authority of the king, who's the head of the Church of England. Now, okay, so we establish Puritanism, we establish the Separatists, and then we go to the settlement of New England. And in the settlement of New England, certainly the Separatist colony of Plymouth is significant, but the more significant colony is Massachusetts Bay. And Massachusetts Bay is founded by Puritans who, for one reason or another, are fearful after 1629 that persecution and problems in England are going to get worse, and that they have an opportunity to kind of show the world their real essence of what it means to have true Christianity in society. Once they established Massachusetts Bay, what did they believe, the Puritans, was the purpose of the government of that colony? So they established Massachusetts Bay. Shannon, what's the purpose of the government of that colony? And what was government's role in establishing that example? Yes, and that the government was to enforce the laws of God, right? And that it was, I mean, remember we kept stressing the idea of a sense of mission, a sense of having an opportunity, and they defined that as having this kind of godly, biblical commonwealth, Bible commonwealth. Well, the government of Massachusetts Bay's job was to make sure that that happened, and that people complied and conformed to that. Remember we mentioned that the expansion of New England was really a result of people who fell outside of what the leaders in Massachusetts Bay believed was really the essence of the mission. And we talked about Anne Hutchinson and how she dissented from that. Her challenges involved what we call antinomianism. Antinomianism is this idea that it doesn't matter what you do. Roger Williams, who is going to challenge the separation of church and state, and actually the role of government in Massachusetts Bay, arguing that the government shouldn't enforce any of the laws of God. It is Williams' banishment that leads to Rhode Island. Right? Now, one area, right, everything, I would argue, up until this point, everything that we talked about, every question that I looked at and kind of made reference with are things that we discuss in class. The one thing that there will be questions on the test about that we did not discuss in class is the relationship between the Native Americans and New Englanders, right, and New Englanders. We talked about the relationship between the Native Americans and the settlers in the Chesapeake area. John Smith, Powhatan, you know, the people there. But not New England. So there will be a couple of questions about that, and those are things that you should kind of take a peek at before then. We talked about New York, right? And in your book, all the northern colonies are in one chapter. So New England is discussed first, and then they go to Pennsylvania and New York. Really, the fundamental story of New York is always that it was a colony that was pre-settled by the Dutch. 1609, Henry Hudson is going to sail for the Netherlands, and he is going to establish for them this colony, the Dutch West India Company, Henry Hudson, 1609. And that is really going to be influential in New York. There will be a few questions about the characteristics of Quakerism. We talked about that just minutes ago. And one of those, I think the big thing to remember about Quakerism is this idea of equality, in that everyone has this inner voice, and all of the things that emanate from that. On the test also, there will be several questions that require you to put events in order. Right? Now, that does not mean that there will be dates on those events. It would be really easy if it were, right? If there were dates on there. But I mean, most of them are fairly flagrant, like Columbus landing and the founding of Jamestown. So like I would hope that you would know that Columbus landed, and then much later they founded Jamestown, or Columbus, but maybe more subtle, the Spanish Armada and Columbus landing. Right, what came first? The Armada, right, or no? No, it was Columbus, right, and then the Armada. And then what came after that? Jamestown. And then what about, if I said, what came first? Maryland or New York? Maryland. Okay. What came first? Rhode Island or Pennsylvania?
Rhode Island.
Rhode Island. So most of them are pretty flagrant, in putting in order. Dates are helpful in that regard, but again, if you think about them carefully, then the other thing I'd warn you on the test, the hardest question, I didn't put too many in this test because these are hard. And I don't know how you're going to do on the response. My first inclination on that essay, that brief essay, is to scale it on a score of 1 to 10, with 5 being the absolute lowest. So no matter what you write, you get a 5, right? So that everybody can get half of it right. But I don't know how you're going to do on that, so we'll see. But the hardest questions are when you have to find the exception. There are probably only 2 or 3 questions like that on the test, where, okay, all of the following except, right? Those are the hardest questions.
So we don't like to do this.
So there's only a couple of them on this test, and just to see how you do. Yes, go ahead.
Is there going to be a lot of both A and B, or?
No, none. One right answer for every question. All right? Okay. All right. Happy birthday to you.
It was always